The PlayStation had no shortage of horror games back in the day, with many hitting the mark, being among some of the best ever that would set the stage for a lot of other games to come after it. But there would also be other games that were released on the system that probably didn't hit the mark, but were still popular enough to make them appealing to a degree. While they may not have been as polished as games that had been seen that came before it, they definitely offered up something different, and a lot of them would have taken influence from iconic horror movie series, which we will look at here with Evil Dead Hail to the King, that was developed by Heavy Iron Studios and published by THQ in the year 2000. That would see release on the PlayStation, Windows PC and also on the Sega Dreamcast. That would act as a sequel to the third film in the series, Army of Darkness, reprising the role of Ash, that would once again be played by Bruce Campbell, where he would come back even to do all of the voiceovers and dialogue, with a lot of funny quips and one-liners, but brought the humour of the franchise into the game's realm. But what's interesting about this game is how it approaches itself. While there was a few Evil Dead games released, even up until recent years, with the PlayStation going for more of a third-person perspective, the original Evil Dead Hail to the King plays very similar to the earlier Resident Evil games, utilising pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera perspectives, where you can utilise melee combat and weapons with guns that you will need to use to take out the many different enemies that you will end up facing. One of the most annoying aspects of this game, if I will say that straight away, is that the repetitiveness of the enemy spawning. Once you're in an area, it doesn't matter how long or how much you stay in an area, enemies just constantly keep spawning. They never stop spawning, and once you come out of a screen and go back into it, they spawn again. Even after killing them like a million times, they just keep coming back. So the game is absolutely relentless, and it never gives you a moment's peace in order to try and get further in the game, which will see you dying an awful lot. And that was obviously the influence behind the game's reviews, and that was the major issue that a lot of people had, as it was often considered, while it had some cool elements and it is very dark and atmospheric, like it is a scary game in its own way to a degree, but the downside is that the relentlessness of the enemy spawning so much, it does take away from the overall scare factor, because you don't have enough time to really feel scared or to even have any sort of sense of fear or tension, because the game is just constantly relentless at pushing enemies out at you all the time. Like as soon as you kill one of the deadites, 3 seconds later guaranteed another one will spawn somewhere else in the room that you're in or environment that you're in, and if you go out of the screen and come back, even more keep spawning. It just never stops. And unrealistically, the fact that you never have enough ammo or resources to really contend with the infinite amount of enemies that you have will only add to the frustration, so you will find yourself a lot of time just running past everything if you can. But in some cases you won't be able to avoid enemies, because you'll be running through narrow hallways or corridors, or even in forests where you end up at, like in some cases, in a dark labyrinth surrounded by large bushes and dark trees, and sometimes enemies spawn and you cannot get past them, so you have to take them out, only for another one to spawn in its place literally seconds later, so you can't move more than 2 feet without another one spawning in the exact same place, and you can't really get anywhere. There's a lot of trial and error involved, I will admit, and if you do stick with it, you will be able to finish the game, but not before it frustrates the hell out of you. Now I know I'm going off on a rant here, but I did find that to be an issue when I played the game. Now in saying that, I stuck with it because I really do enjoy this style of survival horror, but probably not to this extent where it does become a nuisance more than anything else. That was my major issue with it. Yes, the controls can be a bit tricky to master because it's not as fluent as the Resident Evil games, but it's just the relentlessness of the enemies is what kills the overall tension, because realistically this should be a very scary game because it has the graphics, it has the atmosphere, it's got a very dark tone, and it has some very cool ideas, but just the bombardment of enemies constantly spawning really kills it, which is a pity. And I know I wasn't the only one to have that issue, because again it's reflective in the game's reviews across all platforms it released on. And I think even at this stage, yes, there were people like myself that still enjoyed this concept of survival horror, but there was a lot of people out there that had become bored of it. And considering this was only about 4 or 5 years after the first Resident Evil released, but it didn't take long for people to get bored of this style, so I suppose you can understand why developers wouldn't touch it, even with developing games up until recent times. It's only really indie developers now that are revisiting this style, because major corporations and businesses won't even touch this, even though the concept would sell, but you'd still end up probably pissing off a lot of people if it's not done right, and it wouldn't be to their liking or to their taste, which is usually always the case. But still, if you're a fan of classic survival horror, yes, it has its gripes, it is frustrating and it can be annoying, but there's definitely enough here to warrant you giving it a go. And truthfully, if you do like games like the classic Resident Evil series and games like it, this isn't the worst game that you can play. There are ones out there that I have played that are 10 times worse, but I do like the atmosphere for what it does do. When you do get a moment where you don't get bombarded with enemies, there is definitely a dark ambience here. If anything, that atmospheric element, they definitely got it it right here, and it does present itself, but not enough for it to make it viable or to even make it lasting, because you're just bombarded with enemies at every opportunity that the game gives you. And the funny thing is, while I'm ranting about all this, I completely forgot to talk about the game's story. So yeah, as we go back to that, right, the game is set after the Army of Darkness, and Ash is haunted by nightmares of his past, which upon regaining his job in his local hometown, he ends up having a new girlfriend. And in order to deal with these demons, he tries to revisit the cabin in the woods where it all started, but little did he know that things would take a turn for the worse very quickly, because his severed hand that he ended up having to lop off during Evil Dead 2 that became possessed is still roaming around the area, and the tapes that had the incantation for the Necronomicon were never destroyed. So he ends up playing that on the tape recorder again, and Ash can't shut it off. And sure, once the words are spoken, the demons again are let out from the other realm in which they were trapped, and in turn his girlfriend becomes another victim to it, and that's where it leads to the story with you having to track down and try and save her. But a lot of quirks and interesting quips end up taking a turn for the worse, because with Ash, while he is the hero, he also makes a lot of mistakes, which can also contribute to elements that would lead into later games. But that's the funny element of the series. Even though it is a horror series, there's a lot of funny elements too. Now, like I said, not the best survival horror game on the PlayStation, or even of this period for that matter, but there's definitely something here that if you do put a bit of time to it, and you can be patient with it more to the point, you will definitely get something out of it. Plus, if you're a fan of the Evil Dead movie franchise, which I know I am, there's no reason to not give it a try. Although there would be better games that would move on with the PlayStation 2, especially with Evil Dead Regeneration, that is a third-person shooter, and you have a side character in that game, and I have to admit that is one of the funniest games I've ever played in terms of its overall dialogue. There's a lot of funny humour in that game, and it ended up being a hidden gem. So I will cover that on another video over on my PlayStation 2 channel, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. So if I have done that video already, I will leave a link in the description here so that you can go and check it out. But yeah, if you're a fan, definitely go and check it out, and I would love to know your thoughts of it and what you think of it overall. Did you find this game equally as frustrating and annoying, or did you genuinely enjoy the game if given a bit of time and patience? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of games like this that were also released on the PlayStation, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to check out this playlist here on screen to see a lot more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.